All right, gentlemen, I've got a good one for you today. Been looking forward to this conversation with I'm going to just call him my friend. And he didn't agree to that title of our relationship. But I'm going to say that because when I think of a friend, I think of somebody that I open up to. When I think of a friend, I think of somebody that I feel like they're honest with me. They have my back. Now, that's not actually how Rick and I were introduced. We didn't start off as pals. We started out because I reached out and I needed some help. And Rick was able to offer a little support in a very critical time. And you'll understand more about that as I read his formal intro. If you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I like to start off just speaking from the heart. And the thing that I want to tell you about Rick from the heart is that I really appreciate how aware, how conscious, but how the word bold comes to mind. And I don't know that that's the right word, but there's like this decisiveness that comes with this wisdom of having lived a few years on the planet, having done work on himself, having communicated with many people, having studied. But there is this decisiveness that when he answers something, uh, and discusses something, you feel safe in his company. That's how I would describe it. Even prior to hitting record on the show, I was talking about, hey, Rick, I'm happy to talk about my marriage. I'm pretty open. I'm pretty vulnerable. And I said, if you want to go there, great. And with certainty, Rick had said, I will follow you into that space, but I will not lead you into that space. And it was just coming from this place of being solid in who he is, what he knows about his role in our relationship, what he would do, what he wouldn't do. And that confidence, I can model. I can take that and put that into my marriage and into my parenting and into my professional relationships and into my friends. And that's the kind of feeling I get when I talk with Rick is like, ooh, I can just model how Rick's being, not what he's necessarily telling me to do with my life. Now, here's the read of the official bio. That was the Jon Vroman heart bio for Rick. But here we go. So this is what you would read if you went to our website or to his website or caught up with Rick in some other space. He is a seasoned marriage and family therapist. He has a thriving practice in Los Angeles alongside his wife, Marty Simpson. And his journey into counseling began with the attainment of a Master's of Science degree in 2010. Since then, Rick has specialized in trauma healing and relationship recovery, focusing on assisting couples navigating high conflict scenarios, sex addiction, and betrayal. For 5 years, Rick worked at the Center for Healthy Sex, delving into the intricate dynamics of intimacy and the impact of developmental trauma on relationships. As a certified sex addiction therapist, he brings a specialized perspective to understanding and managing the complexities of out of control sexual behavior. Rick employs various therapeutic modalities, including somatic experience, level 3 PACT therapy, PACT, deeply immersed in Stan Tatkin's psychobiological approach to couples therapy, and also training in the relational life therapy under Terry Real's guidance, which, by the way, all names that I've been hearing about for years, other therapists have, talked about, friends of mine have recommended. I've read Terry Real's work and enjoy that. Stan Tatkin also, I can personally attest to that and the impact that it's had. And these conversations, by the way, come up routinely. I don't even want to, maybe weekly, for sure monthly in my life and in my world. So it was one of the reasons I was drawn to Rick was because of these works that he's studied. It felt very aligned for me. Among other things, Rick is trained in EMDR, neurofeedback, and the internal family systems model. So guys, that's just a little bit obvious. Obviously, that's not all of who Rick is because he's a complex being and a human soul and a fellow traveler, as he would say, and as I understand. So Rick, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time, your energy, every minute with you, to me, is one that's treasured. So I look forward to this conversation, which I don't know where this is going to go. Like we're not following a script. I didn't send Rick questions, but I will tell you, gentlemen, if you want to like, hey, do I want to listen to this show? I'm sure we'll get into on some level, and I have an interest in talking to Rick about, is what does he see? What are the trends? What are the tools, resources that you gentlemen can take and apply based on all of his work and what he's seen and what he's learned in his own life, and that with all the people that he's connected with. So we're going to talk about you, the man, and what's happening inside you, maybe how to deal with triggers, maybe how to deal with conflict in a relationship. We can give you, possibly, we'll explore some key verbiage that might be useful for you. And maybe you'll just get to the end of the show and just feel like you're not alone. Like I do many times when I talk to Rick, I just feel like somebody understands me, and we can go through and have challenging times in life. So Rick, honor to have you. Welcome to the Front Row Dads podcast.
Thank you so much, Jon. And it truly is an honor to be here and support the work that you do. So I really appreciate the invitation.
Something I don't know that I ever told you is that the very first ever Front Row Dads retreat in 2016, Front Row Dads were like getting together to talk about how to be better dads. It was so clear by the end of that retreat that what the men really struggled with more than anything was their marriage. That was like, it was almost a curveball to me. I didn't even expect that was really the nucleus of where they felt the most pain, the most struggle, that's the thing that they wanted to discuss and talk about, because it was almost a prerequisite in their minds and in their hearts to being a great dad. Whether that's true or not, it felt like if they could heal the relationship with their partner, that parenting and leading their children was so much more effective.
Yeah, you're right on target in terms of what I see and what I had to go to school, literally, to learn. I mean, you're talking to a fellow who has been through a number of divorces, and I literally went to graduate school to get some sense of like, hey, why are other people in the world having these long-term successful relationships, and I seem to be burning out or doing destructive things over and over and over. So I went to school to learn how to be better relationally, and
Yeah.
immediately became focused on being a couples therapist.
I was just talking with one of my new friends, Jason Gaddis, who wrote Getting to Zero. He runs the relationship school. Great guy, psychologist who therapy work with a lot of men and couples. And I said, what's the one thing? For him, it was repair. Like if there's one thing, it's repair. Would you agree with that, or is there something different in your
Oh,
world?
I totally agree with that. And that the first time I heard that was from Stan Tack, and he would say the relationship is in the repair. And if you, and
Mm,
again, what I'm hoping to point out in this conversation that I am so glad to be part of today is that I'm the messenger. The things that I know, the vocabulary that I bring to the table, I got from other people. Basically, I'm standing on all these other thought leaders' shoulders. And so I'll be referencing Stan Tatkin, Terry Real. Um, Terry points out that we start in a relationship with harmony, but every relationship goes from harmony to disharmony. And the key is, if you're in disharmony, that's where people get divorced. That's where people break up. The successful couples say, hey, how do we get back to repair? And if you think about even caring for children, you can be connected to your kid, and then suddenly something happens. Even with an infant, they'll get a little stomach ache or something, and they go from being connected and happy to being in discomfort. So harmony, disharmony, and our job is to try to realign with them and bring it back into repair. Well, the same thing goes for adults. We both brains have about 86 billion neurons in them. And so there's no way that two brains are going to always see something the same way. So inevitably conflict is going to come up. And
mm.
how you manage that conflict and what you make as what you get out of that conflict in terms of connection and results and agreements makes all the difference between moving forward in a relationship and staying stuck in either resignation or resentment.
It's maybe a tough question to answer, but it's the one that comes up for me, and I know it comes up for other guys, is what happens when one part of the couple, one side of the table wants to do the work and the other one doesn't?
Hmm.
This comes up to me a lot from other people, is it feels like it's imbalance. One person in the relationship is more committed to the work, the therapy, the frameworks, the strategy than the other one. So how do you help somebody in that situation?
Well, I'd say I help them by normalizing that this is what a lot of couples go through. It's very difficult for someone to think, hey, look, if you would just do this way, we'd have so much more relief. And it's never that simple. We tend to pick who we connect with for unconscious reasons, which means that we live these lives thinking that we know what's going on, but there's so many unconscious automatic behaviors below the surface that we either tend to uh, project some of that automatically on someone else, so we think they're the problem, or they could be acting out in a way that is truly destructive. That depends on what your agreements are in the relationship, whether people are agreeing to things or not. But to come back to your question, what you can, a lot of people can get a lot of relief very quickly if they start thinking about, what am I doing? What am I bringing to the table? What is my automatic brain coming up with? What stories am I making about this behavior? Because if we all take a moment and think about, say if you're in a relationship and you think about something that bugs you about your partner, you'll notice that you have a physiological response to anything that's important. And that points to how much our automatic brain runs the show without us knowing it. You can think like, I'm going to be calm. Like, for example, in this interview, it's really a pleasure to talk with you. And I'm glad that I might be heard by people that this could help. But while I really want to do this, my heart's beating. I'm feeling a little nervous. And I notice that while my intention is to really connect and enjoy your company and get these words out, my nervous system is doing something as if I'm under threat.
Mm,
And so I'm answering your question with a very uh, long answer that has to point to what is happening at a deeper level. Are you staying regulated in moments of conflict? If you think your partner is doing the work or not doing the work, it's not as important as you staying regulated and working on your inner game while you present your needs,
yeah.
because it's so much of what your partner is going to do has to do with how you're showing up and how you're communicating what you want. Anything that comes out that sounds critical is going to typically trigger something in the other person's nervous system that's going to have them maybe come out with defensiveness or shutting down or withdrawal. And just staying out of that zone and staying in a place of knowing how to talk to your partner so you can be heard makes so much difference. So I tell people, don't wait for your partner to change. You work on your own self. Let's see how good you are about staying out of withdrawal, or staying out of needing to be right, or staying out of trying to control your partner, or staying out of yelling or raising your voice and doing something startling or retaliating. Those are the 5 bad rules in a losing game you'll hear from Terry Real. And most people, if they just follow those guidelines, they're going to be way ahead of most of us, because most relationships are automatic until you put in a lot of energy to make them more conscientious and make yourself more self-aware of how you're showing up. So bottom line, take personal responsibility for a communicator before you start pointing fingers
Is
for being
there
a good
ever a
communicator.
time when losing your shit is the right move? And here's what I mean. I know that Terry Real has some statement. You'll know it better than me, but it's like nothing. There's nothing you can say with harshness that loving firmness doesn't say better.
Nailed it. You nailed it.
Okay. I love that. And I think
Me
that
too.
I have an intense side of me that can really get riled up and can fluster some people that I love very much. I'm speaking of my family.
Hmm.
And then there's some times, Rick, where I'm like, I'm raising my voice and I'm saying this with intensity and I'm doing it on purpose. Because this is
Hmm.
one of those moments when a loud voice and and talking with some intensity is like needed. Like that's what this situation needs right now. Am I just lying to myself, or is there something to that it's like using a curse word where you go, if you just use it all the time, maybe it loses its effectiveness, but put it in the right place at the right time can accentuate could add to the story. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize all of what I'm saying these aren't facts. We're talking about opinions and theories, but Maybe they are facts. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, that's what's great about what's happened in the field in the last 30 years is we're starting to see with all this technology the actual evidence of why what happens happens. And it
Mm,
makes so much sense if you look back in terms of evolution. So there's something that's really I focus a lot of time and thought energy on it, which is dopamine. And there's a dirty little secret that us human beings, mostly we're animals. We like to think that we're humans, but if you look at our brain matter, we're mostly animals. We're mostly running on instinct and reactions, and it can be surprising that when we're yelling, um, there's a depending on the circumstance, there's a little pleasure to it. There's a dopaminergic rush of
mm,
power or boundary setting, like I'm doing something to keep myself safe or stopping something, so it can feel good. It would make sense that as we evolve over thousands of years, that anger is still with us because it served a purpose. Well, what does anger do? It can push away danger. It can put a stop to something that's intrusive, or it can actually help us not have to feel things that are deeply vulnerable or uncomfortable in the moment. And so the question I'd ask you to consider is what's going on for you that got you to a place where this was your last stop, if you will?
mm.
The poet David Whyte says that uh, anger is the last stop for hope or love. And said another way, we don't get upset about things that we don't care about, but it's kind of a counterintuitive way of getting your needs met if you think it's going to work long term, because as soon as you violate someone else's respect, you'll pay for it later. And so
Wow.
you'll be logged as a predator. So while it might work for you in that moment, you're going to end up lower than where you started in the long run.
Yeah. Anger is the last step for hope,
Last stop, like
last stop for
it's
hope or
it's
love.
yeah, it's like a primitive way of expressing something that really hurts. And I can't say how much this hurts, so I'm gonna tell you, I'm really upset. And growl at
Yeah.
you instead of saying, "Gosh, I wish you'd come over and spend more time with me."
Yeah.
I said, "Where the fuck are you going tonight?"
Right. Yeah. When you look back on your childhood, and I didn't get permission to ask you this question, so
Ask away. I'm a
feel
fellow traveler.
yeah. Tell me a little bit about what examples you had or didn't have in your early life. And I think that the reason I go here, Rick, so often is because it gives us so much as fathers today to think about our own experience as kids. I think we get very disconnected to our own experience as kids, what we felt like, what we wanted, what we like, we just don't pay attention to that. We don't tend to our inner child. We don't really give that space. So if you could just open up and talk to me a little bit about what you saw or didn't see in this realm of relationship of where were the models and the warning signs for you?
You bet, you bet. And let me just point out that for men, for us testosterone-driven humans, uh, there is actually an encouragement at some level to not be in touch with emotions. You can look at any schoolyard for boys in early ages, and they'll learn pretty quick uh, what it means to be vulnerable or not. And there's all sorts of evidence of how bullying can be very toxic. Yet that's something that's manifested in brains that have more testosterone than, say, a female brain. And so that sort of vulnerability is not encouraged. That self-awareness is not encouraged because our job is to get the job done or be part of the team or be competitive. There's some underlying premises that still exist, even as much as we'd want to manage that differently in modern society. Those are tools that would have been very helpful in primitive times for survival, not necessarily for relationship, but to pay the species forward. My upbringing is quite, I would say, non-relational, which is where my trouble started because um, even just recently, my wife gave me a 23andMe kit, and I found out that my dad was not my actual biological dad. And so from the very beginning, when I look back at some of the places where I wasn't connected to him, where we didn't spend time together, part of that was because I think at some level he knew I was not his progeny. But also on another level, if you think of what intergenerational trauma means, it means that whatever our ancestors did to survive, may have worked and been adaptive from a standpoint of like, hey, we stayed alive, but it may have been maladaptive from a standpoint of being connected, being attuned, being nurturing, which in the human experience becomes also a very vital ingredient to being able to enjoy your life. Like how not just what you earn, but who are you connected to? And that's what I love about your message so much. You keep talking about how fatherhood um, can be emphasized rather than just being a provider. But my childhood, my dad grew up during the Depression. And so what happened when he grew up was his life became chaotic and very scarce. And so his mentality through the entire time that I was raised by him was, you never know when your next meal's going to be here. Just be glad you have a roof over your head. And if I'm providing, then my job is done. I will do what I need to do to put food on the table and keep a roof over our head. But when it comes to managing psychological issues or pain or being dealing with the trials and tribulations that all school kids grow with, he wasn't a resource. My mom, an actress, was very preoccupied with whatever was going on in her nervous system left over from her childhood. She grew up in a small town, which also dealt with poverty. And her scarcity consciousness was had her be preoccupied with getting attention and being somehow the center of people's interest. And so she's trying to heal by getting external validation. My dad's trying to stay stable by being stoic. And so that means that as this little boy comes into the world, his job is to figure a lot of this stuff out with his own little brain. And what I'd really want to get across to the men that listen to this program is while kids can act and talk like they are little people, their brains are by no way as complex as the adult brain. And what seems to help people the most through their childhood is when bigger brains loan their resources and their complexity to the little brains to help them wire up. And so much of that is done through tone and attention. And um, even that works in adult to adult relationships. We'll get to that, but I want to see if I answered your question. Like my background was non-relational. My background was stoic, and
Yeah.
so that left a deficit that haunted me until I went to school and say, "Oh, look, this sort of stuff needs to be learned. It's called secure functioning."
Yeah. Talk to me about internal family systems. What is that exactly? I feel like I have an idea, but how do you define that to people? Talk
Um,
talk to us like, to for anybody in the audience that has no idea what an internal family system is. Talk
okay,
to us about
I'll
that.
do my best. It's a very a short. It's an important question with a long answer. There's a gentleman named Dr. Richard Schwartz who uh, is a therapist, and he came across this idea when dealing with people with multiple personalities, that even if you weren't diagnosed with some sort of disorder, that he discovered that even people who were highly functional had multiple components to who they were.
For
And
sure.
so he came up with the language internal family systems to help people identify, like, well, who am I talking to right now? Is this the 5-year-old you? Is this a
Mm,
7-year-old you? Is this the teenage rebellious you? Is this the pre-verbal, pre-cognitive 1-year-old sitting in a crib where no one's tending to your screams? And it gave us structure, even though we're really talking about neurology, but it gives us something to kind of identify so we can navigate our own narrative. Um, it helps people understand like who's doing the talking right now. And why that's important is if you can start to be gentle with yourself in a moment of stress, because that's when our automatic defenses come out. Um, you might realize, like, let's say you're fighting with your partner, um, you might find yourself coming from a 5-year-old perspective. And if you think how much complexity a 5-year-old, that's not really going to bring you many tools to the table to resolve or get through conflict. And as
mm,
soon as you recognize that, you can diffuse a situation like, hey, hold on a second. That was my 5-year-old talking right now. Can I do a redo? And most partners will meet that vulnerability with vulnerability, like, yeah, sure. Yeah, you sounded like you're being a brat. Okay, let me tell you what's really going on. And Dick helped people, Dick Schwartz, Richard Schwartz, helped people understand that you can talk to your inner parts and help them so you don't end up foisting them on your partner.
Yeah.
I can't emphasize enough to anyone listening how automatic our brains are. That when we're put under stress, most human beings uh, revert to a mammalian response of fight, flight, or freeze. I'm sure everybody's heard that by now, and this because the world is getting more and more educated. But when we're in that state, we have to shoot first and ask questions later. But that's not relational. So it's about survival in those moments, and we can be very young using those. I hope that
Um,
answered the question. It's just a way of visualizing what part of
yeah.
your brain is firing at any given time.
So a couple things going on in my mind and in my heart right now. One is I love this because I did understand intellectually on some level what you're talking about, and therapists, you friends have helped me to have the language of, who am I talking to? I think that was even something I got out of Terry Real's book. Maybe it came up at some point. I'm sure it did. There's overlap in
Oh,
all of this, so
absolutely.
much of
He's a
this, right?
big fan of this.
Yeah, he's like, one of the first questions is, who am I talking to? And that's really
Exactly.
helped me with Tatiana because I'll go, oh, I'm talking to her 17-year-old. And I'm not quite as interested in like, fighting with her 17-year-old. And almost like the younger I go, the more compassion I have.
Exactly.
This also showed up for me, but I didn't know that was internal family systems. I just knew the language and the act of doing it. And I've been practicing it within more so this last year. What I would also tell you is I was at an event recently and there was a person there who I've been in the same space as this person multiple times. I typically get the sense, and I realize it's a story. I'm not saying this is real. It's the feeling I have of this person is like too cool for school, too good for me, kind of blows me off. Like I get that's the story I tell myself. They're kind
Hmm.
of like not interested in who I am. Maybe I'm not famous enough or whatever. I tell myself this, right? This could have nothing to do with the reality of it. But that's what I tell myself. And then I was sitting at this event with this person. And again, probably like the third or fourth time I've been around them. And I could feel that I was having this like, there you are, you person who doesn't see my greatness and, judging me and, doesn't connect with me. And I was felt this judginess come on. And then all I did, Rick, was I pictured this person as an 8-year-old. And I imagined this person, I literally made their face younger. I made their face look younger and I shrunk them and visually made them an 8-year-old sitting at that table telling the same story. And then I imagined also this 8-year-old who was like hurt by somebody in their life.
Mm.
And then I thought, what if this 8-year-old was hurt by somebody that looked exactly like me? What if he was a blonde, or sorry, a pale, bald, 5'11" dude who hurt this person when they were younger and I just happened to look like, what if that's what's really going on? What if this has nothing to do with me, but their 8-year-old was wounded by somebody who I might have represented somehow? And dude, the minute I thought this, Rick, I felt nothing but love for this person. And then what happened is I ended up saying something to this person really kind later about being grateful for who they were and all this stuff, right? And like I could see their heart and they lit up. And dude,
Amazing.
this one act of changing who I saw. Now, I know we're not talking about the exact same thing, maybe as like the therapeutic element of internal family system, but because I now have explored this relationship of my own inner child, my own 8-year-old, and I've played with that now in my marriage with Tatiana. I'm taking that out into the world and it's making a difference in the way that I'm just connecting or not connecting with people that are in my circumference for, a couple of hours. And it's been very
Yes.
powerful. But empathy is when I get to that place, it's like the medicine for judgment and contempt and all of that energy.
John, that is such a moving story. And thank you so much for sharing that. And it exactly fits in with what we're talking about because you don't want your inner children running your life. They're going to try because they were our protectors in those days. That's all we had.
Yeah.
And if they jump up in front of our wise adult, if you imagine that the party that kicked in was the thinking part, the most evolved part of your brain that saw a bigger picture, that could futurize what would happen if I went through these scenarios, or you could visualize the past. That's the most expensive but most useful part of our brain, and you switched over to that and got yourself out of the automatic part of your nervous system to do that, and that's the name of the game.
Yeah.
So, and if you listen to all the research out there, especially Stan Tatkin makes this point quite clearly, a majority of what we think a relationship is, we make it up. And I mean, you could throw a number out there, like 95% of the relationship that we think we have, we make up. And you can test this anytime. Someone drives by you, cuts you off. Selfish driver, lousy driver, only thinking of themselves. Oh, wait, that person's rushing their
Yeah.
wife to the hospital. Or you text someone and they don't text back. Where the you know what happened? My wallet and phone was stolen. And so our brains make up shit
Yeah.
all the time. That's the downside of this incredible simulator we have called our prefrontal cortex. And it's an ongoing frontier. It's an ongoing paradox to manage. We need them both in
Yeah.
our system. But that
Well,
story you told me is outstanding because it's the name of the game. Get out of your automatic responses, try to see a bigger picture, and lead with empathy, as you said, and relief. If you see your partner's in trouble, help them out when you can,
yeah.
because if you take it personally, then you're just going to go into this dance with them, and it's treacherous.
Dude, I just shared this story, I think, on another podcast interview that I did. But it's so relevant right now. And I think you might actually even know this person. So Preston Smiles, I'd reached out to multiple times and he wasn't getting back to me. And I was like making up this whole story that he was upset with me somehow. And then I realized I had accidentally blocked his number and finally figured it out. 4 months he's been like, this was like a disconnect. And finally he's sending me screenshots of his phone. He's like, I sent you a video here, I called you right back here, like, and I made up this whole story. And I'm amazed by how often that occurs. I think you said something so important there, Rick, and I want to explore this for a minute of like the stuff we make up, right? The stories we make up. This is not actually what, and even like all the evidence of like, we don't even really know what happened to us. Like, right? All the research now around, you're really not good at remembering what actually happened in that moment. And even you get three people that were all there in the same room, they all have a different story of what happened.
Yes.
How do we navigate that? What are the tools that we can use to get out of the story, out of the judgment, out of the confusion and the fog of war, and get into a more clear, how do we align with our, like, where do we agree? Almost in that hostage or that negotiation tactic of like finding common ground.
Oh, it's a great question, and it's a very challenging question for all of us because it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I'd say when it comes to couples, the first thing you want to do is agree to be in agreement around this is the kind of thing that's going to happen, and we have to have agreements in place. So when we don't feel like being nice, when we don't feel like offering empathy, we do it anyway because that's the agreement we make. We know that we're better off managing our automatic responses. So that would be the first thing, is like, do you want to do this with me? Can we agree that you're never going to come into the room and shout, ah! And yes, I'm glad to do that for you. Then there's a whole list of things you could make as part of your relationship vision. The other thing is to really get to know what your own system is doing as much of the time. That's you making extra effort to stay out of your childhood defenses and adaptations and into your wise adult that can get a bigger picture and slow things down. We won't always be able to do that. Our nervous system is designed to keep us alive, and it's going to reflex at certain situations that are stressful. Just know what those are and do your best to integrate those with maybe the trauma of the past isn't happening now, and learning better responses. So what that does is it lowers your allostatic load, meaning your nervous system isn't as high strung for vigilance and reflexive aggression or withdrawal. So yeah, sorry, I'm using a bunch of words here, but it's just basically you want to lower your stress level in your body by knowing yourself and having those sort of things that still hurt integrated and understood.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is just listening to folks like Tatkin and Reel around what are the techniques that you can have. Here's an example from one of his, from Terry Reel's book, and I put it in the phrase EVA, EVA, like a person's name. Is what I'm about to say to my partner empathetic? Is what I'm about to say to my partner vulnerable? Is what I'm about to say accountable? And if you can think to run that filter, which takes a lot of energy, by the way, which is why we don't do it all the time. This is the most expensive part of our brain. It uses lots of glucose and oxygen, and we know it. And so we're going to avoid being in that state because we have to take a nap every few hours. It's just basically committing to trying to do that as much as you can.
Can you give us some language around, maybe even looking at all your clients, if there was like a common statement without revealing any personal data, you just go, I've heard this 1,000 times, right? Or this is the thing that most people wrestle with. And then I tell them to say this. I tell them, like, here's examples, Jon, of empathetic words. Here's examples of vulnerable words. Here's examples of accountability. And maybe even you can share with us, like, how to say it, examples of what to say and how to say it.
Wow, I'd love to have that. I think if that were possible, there'd be one self-help book written and then all of us would go out of business. So, but along those
Well
lines,
said.
but I do want to offer, because I will say this throughout this podcast, really try to wake up to the fact that we're mostly automatic mammals. And so the assumptions we make are based on information that we are comfortable with, and it may not be actually what's happening in front of us. So I'd say before you say anything that seems like it's driven by an energy of urgency or activation, if you know what I mean, like, you can feel when you're feeling edgy or snarky. See if you could go to a second way of thinking. That would be the first part of your brain just wanting to get it out. But the second consciousness is, hey, wait a second. And this is right out of Stan Tatkin's language. I'm part of a two-person psychological system. So if I do something to this system, it's going to affect me in the long run. So let me try to answer your question. You want to talk in a way that's inarguable. If I say, Jon, the questions you're asking me are so challenging. I really don't appreciate you putting me under this kind of stress. That's going to feel like, oh, he's might be starting a fight. I would never say that, by the way. I'm loving this interview. But if I had something to get off my chest, I say, hey, I'm noticing something happening for me. I'm feeling a little nervous about some of the questions you're asking me, and I'm trying to figure that out. I'd like to work that out with you. You can't really argue with my experience. So what I try to teach couples to do is bring their needs and their complaints out as requests in a vulnerable way without making the other person feel wrong. No one wants to hear complaints. No one wants to hear criticism, but they might hear you if you say, hey, here's my experience of you.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I'd say when you're presenting a need, use something like Terry Reel's feedback wheel. What you saw or heard. Oh, you got to go.
No, I wanted to create a positive interruption.
Hey there.
Hi.
Hi there.
So
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
this I didn't tell you, Rick. I was gonna surprise you. Is I sent Tatiana a text message when we were talking, and I said, "Can you come hug me before you leave?" And so
Yes.
she's taking our son to explore his school today. We had a rough couple days, day, morning. So in the spirit of, like, I was like, what would Rick do right now? I was like, I'm gonna send Tatiana a message and just say, can you come hug me before you leave? By the way, you're on the Front Row Dads podcast.
Oh,
All right.
Anything you
Well,
want to say to the dads out there?
I love you.
and thank you both for turning towards the relationship, because it's the spirit of making what you folks do together the most important, because from there everything stems outward. So thanks for doing something that may not have been comfortable, but you did it anyway for the sake of waving the flag of friendliness.
Yeah.
It's so important that we lead with that sort of signaling to try to get us out of a reactionary state.
Yeah. Yeah, 1,000%. Do you want to tell everybody how perfect I am?
I'd like to tell everybody how perfect I am. Let's start there. That's a good start.
It takes a lot of perfection to put up with his perfection.
That's right.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna
Good
run.
seeing you. Thanks
to
for
see you,
dropping in.
Rick.
Same.
Rick, sorry to interrupt. I just thought that
That's,
would be
how
a fun
perfect is
surprise.
that?
Yeah.
Interrupting with couples behavior is exactly what you ought to be doing.
Yeah. Well, I also thought, I don't know if she'll come up. I don't know how that, it was again, just like it was really me following my heart, Rick, based on I really did ask myself, what would Rick do in the situation? I was like, he'd invite her in. He would, you would just take a moment to put my 48-year-old Jon Vroman, loving, empathetic, vulnerable, and accountable self in the driver's seat.
Yeah, exactly. And anything that you can do to make anything that people can do. By the way, when dads do this with their partners in front of their kids, it sends such a good signal to the kids that mommy, I'm going to use heteronormative language here, that mommy and daddy take care of each other. So now we can be free. We don't have to worry about managing them. And that's a big thing I hope that men can hear, is that if you receive influence from your partner, if you share power with your partner, if you are showing up as we are in each other's care, one of Stan Tatkin's books, uh, that sends a signal to all the little systems in your family looking at you saying, hey, did these folks have their act together? By the way, anyone in your audience, including you and me, again, fellow travelers, if you think about how you felt, if you ever saw your family fight, especially the parents, you'll notice that for a lot of us, it's terrifying, because we know at some deep biological level, if the gods don't have their shit together, what does that mean for us? Because
Yeah.
we're not going to jump in a car and go to the market and get eggs, or know how to lock the door if there's a thunderstorm or something. So know
Yeah.
that your children are watching, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of ambition, and it's a good deed to want to be a relational man.
Yeah. Man, I was just saying to Tatiana within the last week or two, I said, we had this rupture. And I said, I think it's really important that we repair this in front of the kids. Like, I think there needs to be a moment where we sit down and say, hey, this is what happened, because it wasn't so long ago before that, maybe 3 weeks ago, where a friend of ours was revealing that he grew up in a house where when people would get into a fight or there was rupture, they would just like take space, but they never resolved it. It was like it would be this big blowout. Nobody would talk to each other for 5 days. And then you'd be at the kitchen table and somebody'd be like, hey, can you pass the mashed potatoes? And it was
Right.
like, that was
Like
it.
nothing
Then
happened.
right back into the game, but it never felt resolved. It never felt like there was any, like, I get healing and maybe sometimes like letting go, or those are wonderful things, I believe, but also so is resolution and open repair, and like addressing that this happened and what we learned from it and what's okay and what's not okay, and like learning about our boundaries. I think what this person was particularly expressing to me is it just felt like we were ignoring the problem, not necessarily truly healing from the problem.
Exactly. And that sets up kind of a tension in a person's system of like, well, okay, I guess I'm on my own. I
Yeah.
guess people can't be trusted. I guess conflict is expensive and it doesn't come up with any rules. Jon, you say so many things that are so helpful, and I have to point out that whenever you have a rupture, it's change trying to happen. That's from
Ooh.
Ellen Bader's group, I believe, came up with that phrase, which is conflict is change. No, actually, it's Harville Hendrix in the Imago. A conflict is change trying to happen. And it's important that if you fight and expend that kind of energy, it's like, okay, what agreement can we harvest from this so we don't keep having this same fight for the next 40 years? And then you'll start to collide into sometimes what would be called structural problems, like, well, I've always wanted to live in Texas. Well, I have to live in Colorado. Well, that might be a deal breaker. And you might end up having to have some very more harder, difficult conversations around that. But at least know what you're fighting for. So if you can, you come to an agreement like, how about we never do that again? Deal? Deal. Good. Now that's put to rest.
Yeah.
And you take a 40-year argument, turn it down into an hour.
Rupture is change trying to happen, something like that.
Conflict.
Conflict is change trying to happen.
Yeah.
Well, we can use rupture and then credit you with that sentence.
I'm not looking for credit. I'm really just
teasing.
the messenger.
I know you are. By the way, I love that. That feels like that in my body, that statement is like, ooh, that's so healing just to hear that. And because sometimes my internal language, Rick, is conflict again is like the meaning is like conflict again, man, I'm an idiot, I'm slow, I'm wounded, I try to take responsibility, but it's usually more like shame, not a healthy form of
Oh,
responsibility, you know.
thank you for identifying that, because that comes back to your earlier question, like what advice do you have for couples? What are some of the takeaways? That's another thing that I think is underestimated in people's relationship is how much shame can trigger us into being defensive, and we may not even know it because it's such a
Yeah.
painful thing that we want to get away from, that we just go to language, we go to withdrawal, we go to conflict or power moves. And I just appreciate you saying that, because even any interactions that you have here with Tatiana, if you were to do an evaluation, like, is what I'm feeling shame? Am I feeling like
Yeah.
I've disappointed her? Or, here I am doing my podcast, but yet I end up not doing what I tell other people to do in my own home. That can send us into a direction of wasting a lot of energy, frankly. I'm such not a fan of shame. I'm not a fan of shame. It's such a defense that's used for a very young person, but it's unnecessary as an adult. Guilt is necessary. You want to take responsibility for when you've done wrong and
Yeah.
repair it. But shame says, I'm a bad person, and that takes you out of the game.
Yeah.
And that's no good for anybody. It doesn't help the person you've hurt, because they're just watching you being self-loathing, and that's not going to make them feel any better. And it's self-directed contempt, and who needs that? Those days are over. I'll
Was
tell my
there
clients, here, I'll give you 5 seconds of shame, and now get back in the game and help your wife.
Yeah. Yeah, good advice. Empathy, or empath are you empathizing? Are you vulnerable? Are you accountable? I interrupted you in the middle of that with my surprise from Tatiana. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? I just wanted to give you space for that it involves the language. Like, as an example, and see if I can bring us back into that space for a second, is like, if somebody's being accountable, what does that sound like? What would be something a man would say to his wife if he's being accountable? Um, I, I don't want to make an assumption I know what that means, is because I'm guessing responsible. Like, my part is that
so what you want to do is dig deep. Like, let's say a fight occurs and you're trying to repair it. You simply say, you know what? It was not cool for me to raise my voice.
Yeah.
And that might be hard to say for some people because it means that you made a mistake. That would be very vulnerable. And then the rule of thumb in a relationship is you meet vulnerability with vulnerability. Both of you, Terry Real would say, meet vulnerability with vulnerability. Stan Tack would say, learn to fall on your sword often.
Yeah.
And in my case, in our relationship, I jump on my sword as soon as I recognize that I've had a sword out. So I hope that makes sense. It means that
yeah.
who's right, who's wrong, who cares, that your job is to provide relief for your partner in the initial stage. It doesn't mean that you're going to go into a place of acquiescing to something that you don't believe in. It means that at first, I see I upset you. I didn't mean to do that. Let's take a moment, because you're my partner. I didn't mean to come across that way. Whew, you folks take a beat and say, okay, now realistically, please don't leave the car without gas in it next time, because it made me late.
How many couples, Rick, do you think separate, divorce, break up too early? Like, I see some divorces and I'm like, yeah, I think that made sense. Like, for what it's worth. Like, I'm not the judge of divorces, but it's like, I see some and I think, yeah, actually that makes sense. And then I see some other ones and I'm like, you guys were so good. You just could have weathered the storm a little bit. It was a long winter, and sometimes you just need to, like, weather the storm. And the reason I ask this is that it shows up for me sometimes, and I know it shows up for Tatiana. We've both said it to each other in our own unique ways. of like when we're at the I don't know if I can do this anymore, it's usually like this isn't changing. So this is extremely messy of how I'm trying to get to this question because I don't even know what I'm really asking. So bear with me. But here's what it's like. It's like okay, I know how to explain this, I think. Somebody would say, look, relationships over a lifetime are rupture, repair, rupture, repair. Like you're always going to have some level of conflict. Then you have other situations where it's like, how long are you going to stand for that? Like you're being emotionally abused or this isn't okay. And you just keep tolerating it and you have to teach people how to treat you. And there's this like unhealthy version of rupture, repair. There's a rupture, you let it go, you call it repair. It's like this unhealthy version. So there's like every relationship has rupture, repair. And then you see this other couple over here and you're like, oh, you need to get out. That's unhealthy. And then how do you know in a relationship when you're like, this is what a relationship is. It's work. We need to keep going and we're never going to be perfect and we're always going to get triggered and you're never going to totally win in every case. And how do you know when it's okay and how do you know when it's not okay? That's what I'm trying to get to is
Yeah.
like, it's like me in the gym with my 14-year-old Tiger, my son Tiger, and I'm trying to teach him the right amount of weight to lift. And I'm like, you should feel like pressure in your muscle. That's good. That's where that pain. But if you feel like your ligaments about to like snap, like that's not what we want. So I'm trying to teach him to identify proper pain in a workout scenario so that it's healthy pain, not I'm destroying my body pain. And I'm trying to relate the same situation to a relationship to help somebody calibrate the proper amount of pain.
Yeah. Oh man. So
it
you're
took
asking
me 13 minutes to ask that fucking question.
It's a great question because, and you're asking for a specific answer, and I'm going to do the whole complex response that I think represents what life is, which is there's no one or zero answer per se, but there's components that can point you towards the direction of whether it's a deal or no deal. First of all, you want to recognize that our brains define relationship based on the water we swam in as children. In other words, who we grew up with, how we saw our parents, or if we didn't have parents, how we saw love expressed when we were developing has a huge amount of influence on what feels right to us. And so if you think of what Alain de Botton in the School of Life talks about, he says, we aren't going to be attracted to what's healthy necessarily. We're going to be attracted to what's familiar, familiar. So that is not a choice at the beginning stages of understanding oneself, is that we're going to be attracted to certain chaos, certain rigidity, certain things that happen that we don't even know we recorded growing up. So that's one component. So you have to know yourself in terms of what's important and what feels good, and you'll let your emotions contribute some input to that. Second, it really depends, and in this adult world where we have all these choices and plenty of opportunity and abundance, that you're making a relationship decision based on choice, which means that you pick someone and you work out an agreement. If you and I wanted to merge companies, we would never just sit down and say, hey, why don't we go out on a few dates and then we'll just start working together. We would have meetings. We would understand what your company charter is, my company charter. We do it in every other area. If we're going to go buy a car, we do a little bit of research. We figure out, is this the kind of car I want to be in? But unfortunately, the way our brains work with attraction and familiarity, we tend to be attracted to our unfinished business around relational issues growing up. So it's very important to know that you want to go into a relationship not based on love or attraction. That's nice, but it's not the glue that'll hold you together. Yeah. You've got to have conversations about, like, what are we agreeing to do? Like, you and Tatiana should know what your mission is as a couple. Are we in it for business? Are we in it to make a family? Are we in it to make money? Are we in it to have lots of sex? What are we doing here that we can't get from anyone else, or we'd have to pay a lot of money to someone else to give these things to us. That's another phrase from Stan Tatkin. So you're agreeing to have a quid pro quo mutual arrangement. So far, familiarity in our brain. What is the agreement of the relationship? Then you have something to do the next step, which is what I'm putting in worth what I'm giving up and getting back? Because as soon as you pick one person, unless it's an ethical non-monogamous relationship, you're going to be giving up a certain number of things to be with other people. So you have to say, well, okay, what am I building here that makes it worth it for me to give up all the excitement and novelty, and maybe someone has more expertise or is better at playing chess or something. So that's what I'd say, is set yourself up to observe, like, am I being conscientious about what I want to be, why I want to be in a two-person system? Then, if you're in a two-person system, you're wondering, like, should I be in this or not? You can still apply the same questions. Do we have an agreement? Am I getting what I want for what I'm giving up? And have I done my work around knowing what my automatic patterns are, and if they're misinforming me in terms of what my expectations are versus what can really happen in a two-person system? Because you can't expect unconditional love. You're an adult now. You're not a child. Finally, you can track whether you've gotten to a place of respect but ambivalence if it's time to break up. If you're still hot, if you're still fighting, if you're still going after each other in a way that seems like we said earlier, that anger is a part of it, well, anger is a form of protest. So you may want to look at, well, why am I getting so upset if I'm really done with this person? Stan Tatkin would call that a proof of death. That you come to couples therapy, you work really hard at the principles, and then at the end of it, if you're not remedied, but you're also relaxed, like, you know what, I understand what happened here, and I'm not that upset about it anymore. I realize that we're just not a match. That's your proof of death, but you've done your work. So you don't all of a sudden have this longing in the future, like, God, did I really try everything I should have? Because breaking up is expensive to us. Now, here's a little side note. Sometimes couples will come in and they're at this impasse. This person won't do what I need them to do. This person won't do what they need to do. And it's an interesting thing. If you've ever been through a breakup, people listening, you notice that it is very, very painful for most. And pain changes the brain in a way that no other thing could. Again, from Stan Tatkin's playbook. So sometimes people break up, and then there's a literal neurological transformation that occurs, and they realize, the things that I thought were so fucked up about this person, I can deal with that because I don't like missing the other stuff. And then they come back, and the problem is solved because their brain rewired itself from a standpoint of, oh my God, what have I done?
Is that an endorsement, by the way, for just time off? Like, taking a month or 2 or 3 months apart?
It depends on how it's structured, but in a way, yes. But not automatically, because if you're a person who's avoidant or tends to withdraw and not deal with feelings, that's a vacation. Like, oh, good, I don't have to deal with that pain in the ass that I'm stuck with. That's not the kind of timeout. The timeout I'd recommend in certain very narrow circumstances with a very conscientious approach would be, we're going to pretend that we're done so our brains can get a taste of what it's like to have you still on the planet but not showing me any signals of existence. Because that means I give up the friendship. I give up the cute little thing that you do in terms of whatever happens. If you can conscientiously go into a state of, like, what if I really had to be without this person, or think of them dating someone else, that might trigger the initiation. Sometimes it's only the breakup that tends to wake people up to, oh my goodness, what have I done? And unfortunately, or fortunately, in today's world, where you can immediately distract yourself by jumping on a dating site, or using chemicals, or jumping into something that's auto-stimulating like porn, or high-intensity work, whatever, all those dopaminergic temptations can mask the healing part that would normally come out if you had to sit with your pain longer. So again, you're asking for straight up answers, and I really don't have any, because it's a complex situation. There's more than one brain in our head, if you will.
Yeah.
I hope that's landing for you in a way that feels like,
it's
awesome. We can work with this.
Yeah. And I'm even just like practicing right now, just letting that land for people. because I realize how much, things like this, it could be a lot. It could be a lot in a relationship. You're like, oh my goodness. Like if you, and especially if you're coming in at, and you're just awakening to the fact that your relationship might not be where you're brand new, you haven't read Terry Reel's book, Stan Tatkin's book, you're hearing this for the first time. There's like a lot of new ideas, maybe. There's a lot to practice.
Yeah.
you know Speaking of the shame, and I've talked about this a lot, is like I've noticed I've gone through cycles, being now 8 years into Front Row Dads, 48 years old, 15 years into my marriage, 17 years with Tatiana, right? 2 children, hundreds of books, hundreds of podcasts, countless events. And then sometimes I'll make a mistake or I'll do something and I'm like, I beat myself up extra because I've done so much
Right.
work. you know,
I
like, are
know.
you for real, Jon? Like, you have direct access to all these incredible leaders and you can ask any question you want. You have the resources to do it. You've worked at it. You've done and yet you still, there's a lot of shame in that.
Could I join you with that and say,
Yeah, of course.
and I'll tell you what helped me get through it was hearing Terry Real say, and I'll say it about my own relationship with Marty. If any of my clients, and I tell my clients this, if any of my clients saw Marty and I fighting, you'd never hire me if that's all you saw. Because you say, what the hell
Right.
do we need this guy for? He's just
Yeah.
like us.
Yeah.
The thing that Marty and I had learned to do over the years, and it took a lot of tears and a lot of practice, is we fix it faster.
Mhm.
We realize, okay, we just went into an earlier part of our brain, or there's something threatening going on, or I'm not being heard, or I don't feel seen. I just have to find a different way of presenting that. And we have learned by now to meet that with vulnerability instead of saying, yeah, you need to knock that off. Well, that wasn't a reward for me opening up. So I'm with you on that. If you could just give your break and realize that you're not in control, even though it feels like you can think your way through anything, when there's stress placed on us, either lack of sleep or some loss or some pressures that feel that they're going to impact the well-being of your life, our nervous system reverts to being very mammalian and reactionary. And Stan would say those are the primitives responding to try to keep you alive. Shoot first, ask questions later. So be gentle to yourself because you're doing a wonderful thing on this planet, and that's what you're going to be remembered for. And if that makes sense, great, take it in. But we have to know that the intention to want to get this right is what matters the most.
Yeah.
That you want to keep working at it is what I tell couples. Don't be perfect. Just keep aiming for what you know works and is compassionate.
I just had this vision of like, if Tatiana and I are gonna fight with our reptilian brain, we should dress like I should dress like a caveman. Kind of as a playful pattern interrupt, or maybe that's
just
how I need
make sure
that's
you're
my
using
apology
styrofoam
attire.
clubs.
Yeah, that's right. Rick, I want to be respectful of the time that we've carved out today and your schedule. And I just want to ask like a overarching question here. And you can take this any way you want. And this could be one word, one sentence, or 1 hour, you choose. But the question is just, is there anything else you want to tell the guys? All these men out there who want to be excellent fathers, want to be in incredible relationships with their spouses, want to have emotional intelligence. They're committed to working on themselves. They're ready for that. They're listening to this podcast because they want to be better, clearly.
Yeah.
So, is there something that we didn't get to? Is there a question, a framework, a story, like a tendency, a theme that you're just like, I think this is a critical one for these men to hear, and we didn't talk about it. I just want to give you space to anywhere you want to go, whatever you want to share or teach.
I appreciate that so much. And I've been thinking about that, knowing that we're going to have this conversation today. And just like I answered your straightforward questions with complex, multiple faceted responses, I will do the same here. There's the people who influence me the most. are Stan Tatkin and Terry Real, and I think they're a great combination because Stan taught me what secure functioning looks like. That no matter how old we are, we never outlive the need to be parented or connected to someone. And all the studies prove this. You can see people who are under an MRI, if they're being stimulated with pain, the pain response is lower if they're holding the hand of a nurse. If they're holding the hand of their beloved, they're even more resilient. We know longevity studies show us that relationship is a key to thriving. And we are dyadic creatures, meaning that we came into the world and we take the longest to evolve than any other creature. A horse can be up on its legs in a few hours. Some kids don't leave the house till they're 30. So we do need a lot of attachment in order to wire up that part of ourselves that helps us live. So here, I'll try to sum it up in the takeaway. If you're in partnership, start thinking of what you came together to heal that's unfinished from your family of origin. If that doesn't make sense, then please, men, please, please, please figure out who you can trust, other men who have done the work, where you can drop into a vulnerable space of intimacy, meaning that you get to know both the parts of you that are strong and the parts of you that you're not so comfortable with, that you'd hate for everybody to know, because that is what's going to get in the way of connection, especially if you're in a relationship with a woman. Because women do have an advantage in terms of their ability to connect on a relational level. So first step is recognize that if you want to be part of a two-person psychological system, it's going to take some work, and you can't just show up as a single guy who now has a partner. You have to show up as a person who wants to do some of the things that you're not used to doing by yourself. The second part would be start to learn the difference between whether you're in a state of power versus connection. Us guys, man, we have come a long way and in some ways been criticized for it by using power to get what we need. And our skeletal structure, our muscle dynamics have put us in a place in terms of being able to rule by might and force. That will not get you what you need these days. Women are expecting relationships with men who are relational more and more. And so if you try to rule from a place of power, it will get you to, it will train your partner to respond with kind, and that's not connected. And that you can tell whether you're in a state of power or not by checking whether the person who's listening to you feels respected. Hey, go get me a glass of water, will you? Hey, if you're not too busy, would you get me a glass of water? Just the subtle language modification is one is from power, which would be like grandiose or contemptual thinking, versus, and this is right out of Terry Real's handbook. I was like, you got to know that power is not a place to have a relationship, but dropping into shared power is. So those are two components, and not throw one extra one in there. Your brain's far more automatic than you know. So be ready for some surprises. You're not all that you think you are. You're going to have automatic responses based on things that you couldn't control that shaped you when you're growing up. So be humble. So be humble. Know that you came together to heal each other on a relational basis and give up power with the right person. And you shall have more relational bliss.
That's so great. Rick, thank you, man, for the conversation today. I really enjoyed this. I was writing down notes, you know, and I'm just looking right now at the notes, just thinking about like the dopamine of yelling was new for me, and I hadn't really thought about that. The idea that anger is the last stop for hope and love. I think about our exploration into the internal family system, and I have a new frame on that now. I'm grateful for the language that we were able to explore in some of your examples of the EVA, you know, are you being empathetic? Are you being vulnerable? Are you being accountable? I loved where conflict is change trying to happen. That's a cool one. I love our exploration of the proper amount of pain. I love our surprise visit from Tatiana. That was cool.
Yeah.
Secure functioning, giving people terms that they can go continue to learn about and learn with Stan Tatkin, you mentioned, Terry Real, you mentioned, you gave some resources, obviously giving credit and lots of praise to your the guides, the leaders, those who have shared with you their wisdom so that you can help others. You gave me a question that I'm going to go talk to Tatiana about, which which I love, and we've never sat down and explored what did we come together to heal? What what can our relationship heal, both within ourselves and generational trauma, like in our family unit? What do we have the power to collectively heal? I love this idea of state of power or connection. And then does the person feel respected? I think that's going to instruct and inform how I also help my boys speak to mom or grandma, how they speak to others, which, we do give attention to. I think it could be given even more attention to. And reminding me, and I feel a lot of like, thank you, that my brain is far more automated than I think. Thank you for that. Feels very healing for me and comforting to me. And also reminding me that I do love to hold Tatiana's hand and how regulated my body feels when I simply have human touch. So there's all of that and so much more that came from this show, Rick. And I just want to say this to anybody out there that's listening is, Rick and I have had some very powerful conversations. I can attest to his ability to be present, to ask the questions, to share resources and stories, to be empathetic, to hold the line when needed. And I hope that all of you men find your Rick Hupp in your life. And that can come in many forms. One can be the LMFT form, the licensed marriage family therapist. And it also might be people who aren't licensed in something. A great friend can be your Rick Hupp. A great partner can be your Rick Hupp. But I do want to also not discount, and I don't want to gloss over the fact that Rick is a professional. And having somebody that studies this work, that spends time in this space, that holds, a container for couples to have dialogue, and that you cannot undervalue that. So maybe consider, for you men out there, is this the time when you are ready for some type of counselor, therapist, coach, whatever label you want to give it, finding experts who've done the work, who can support you in your life, whether that's just you and your spouse, whatever it may be. Even consider you and your kids, right? Going to counseling with a child or having conversations like that are powerful. If you happen to be in and around the California area, you might want to hit up Rick Hupp. We will, can I just give out the URL? Your URL is okay?
Certainly. Yeah, it's just
rickhupp.com, HUPP. We will put that in the show notes, of course, with this episode at frontrowdads.com. And guys, if you ever need anything and you just don't know where to go, you can start with support at frontrowdads.com and our team will support you. But I can't recommend Rick more highly. He is outstanding. I've had conversations with therapists for many years, and I would put Rick at the top of the list as far as, his ability to navigate a conversation. And you guys don't need me to tell you that because you just witnessed it. So if you know, and look, Rick's not for everybody. Nobody's for everybody, right? But so just keep searching. But if you got a good hit about Rick, maybe reach out and see what's possible. Rick, thank you, my brother. I appreciate it. Is there anything you want to say? I know we kind of gave you this overarching, hey, but anything to close us out right now? Anything you want to add to what I just shared?
I want to add only the fact that having had this conversation with you, I really appreciate the gifts that you bring. I greatly, I learned a lot about how good of a communicator you are, and that us men, we need that. We need a fellow who can be personal but direct and clear about what he's saying, and you do a great job of that. And I really, really appreciate this opportunity to be able to have this conversation publicly because it highlights your skills.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate you, man. All right, guys. There you have it. That's a wrap for today. Check out Rick's work, rickhupp.com, RICKHUPP.com. And again, if you're in California, that is where he's based. Reach out. And if not, gentlemen, please find your resources and maybe consider starting with Stan Tatkin, Terry Real, that work. And for those guys in Front Row Dads community, in our brotherhood, go do the work, because what our community needs is men who are doing the work and then bringing their stories back to the community and sharing vulnerably where you're struggling, what you tried, what worked, what didn't work. That's how we, so that's how we do it. Sit around the campfire, tell the stories of the day. That's it. All right, Rick. Thanks, brother. Take care, man.
Thank you.